All right, good evening, everyone. Just to give a context how I met Wasim before I kind of get into this fire chat. So exactly 10 years back, we were in Dhanmondi EMK Center, and we didn't have a lot of place to get together in Dhaka because, nothing is free in Dhaka, right? And so there was a startup event, we organized it, and then people just went up and pitching ideas. And Wasim was sitting next to me, and I don't know him. And he just came back from San Francisco, and he's saying that, I was just talking to him, he's saying that, I have an idea. It's like, what is that? It's like online grocery. It's like, online grocery, what do you do that? You, buy bazaar? It's like, yeah. It's like, who's going to do that in Dhaka? It's like, we have drivers to pick up our bazaar. It's like, it's going to work. So I said, okay, well, I pushed him, why don't you go and pitch? So he pitched, and that was the introduction I had, and I was really impressed with him, and ever since, we kind of bumped into each other. And after he raised his first investment for 500 startups, he came to my office in 2014, and he asked for $5,000 check. And I said no, because I was not brave enough. Because at that time, I just left my my corporate job, a little bit of savings, and I didn't think that, because the vision that he had, I was too kind of not brave enough to join that vision, and I regret that. And sometimes that's a problem with investors in Bangladesh, because when the founders come with this grand vision in Bangladesh, we just simply don't believe in it. And I think that's the failure of a nation and the failure of our citizens, that if we don't think big enough, if we don't have the ambitions big enough, we are not going to be where we really can be. So that's, I would say, start off with something that I think Wasim started off to think of something big, and I'm here today from EMK Center to Gridsley, five-star hotel, talking with, who knows what. All right. So Stan, I'm going to start with you. I have 2 questions. I hope I get them right. I took some of the notes from some of your interviews. So I took notes from the interviews that you've given, so hopefully I got them right. So Stan, you were born in Tartu, university town in Estonia, and growing up during Soviet occupation, where doing business was a criminal offense, right? Yet, right after you went into university, you dropped out, and you started your business. So, how did you transform your mindset in becoming an entrepreneur, where society in general was not conducive of what you wanted to pursue? Because there's a reason I'm asking this question, because in our society, this is also the same case, where entrepreneurship is just not encouraged.
Yeah, I mean, being a teenager is amazing. You do everything as you're not told not to do, right? I think the broader context of that was that Estonia was an independent republic before World War II, and then we got occupied by the Soviet Union for 50 years. And I was born in an era where you still had to learn poems about Lenin at school, but by the time I got to middle school and high school, the country was opening up. Look, we became re-independent, free market economy, super open economy as well, because being tiny, you can't close yourself up. And so that meant, actually, I remember one of my first sentiments was that, oh shit, I missed the boat. Because in the beginning of the 90s, when I was 14, this 18, 20-year-old people were starting banks and telecoms and all of that. And so my generation kind of missed that. And technology gave us the output that this first generation of entrepreneurs who were building more traditional businesses and built the foundation of the economy, they did an amazing job, but we came with a different tool set. So I was a self-taught coder, software was my tool. The amazing thing about software is that if you're building physical products, or if you're building a physical organization or physical shops or whatever, then there's a lot of capital that you require. Whereas when you're building a software company, then it can be you or the keyboard and the credit card for the Amazon hosting, and basically with minimum cost you can create the product which can reach millions and millions of people. The other thing that is true about Estonia is that we don't have those millions and millions of people. So anybody with any sort of ambition to build something big and meaningful starts with a mindset of, okay, I can't do that for the Estonian market. So people coming from a tiny place have this advantage of thinking that, okay, I need to do things with little resources and I need to do it for very big markets. and that creates a different sort of vibe. So when I was joining, Rauno's partner Jan was one of the co-founding engineers at Skype, and working with Jan and his peers in sort of late 90s on some previous projects and joining Skype. Skype was exactly that story. It was 4 engineers that got into a room, built something for 3 or 4 months, and 2 months later, that thing had the first 1 million users. So like the ratio of human hours that you put in compared to the value created for the world can be super high when you're applying technology.
All right, so I'll go into Rauno now. So I think this is a pain that all founders kind of feel it everywhere in the world, but I think this pain is felt very closely in Bangladeshi founders, and there's a question about capital. So can you discuss capital-related challenges that Estonia startups faced during the early days of building the ecosystem and how these challenges were addressed? Because we are in kind of the same tipping point when it comes to Bangladesh.
So for Estonia, Skype definitely, and broadly, not only for Estonia, but Europe as well, Skype was this kind of pivoting point. I've heard the stories of how Skype fundraised, and that was like basically the same story that Wasim was telling. It's a kind of 10-year kind of hard grinding. In their case, probably it was shorter in terms of timeline, but the amount of no's that they were getting was exceptional. But at some point, they just kind of cut it off, and as Sten mentioned, the path from there on, they basically never looked back. And then the spillover effect that was coming out from that was crazy. But even today, if you look up, Skype started 20 years ago. Skype was exited 15 years ago. Then how long it still has been taken in order to mature as an ecosystem is a relatively lengthy period. So you still need this kind of first sparks, and Estonia has been really lucky that the first sparks were not so much in a technical domain that nobody knows about. They were all kind of consumer technologies. Talking about Skype, which is something that basically all of us have used at some point in time. Transfer-wise, also kind of impacting a large amount of people, and Bolt as a kind of community or mobility solution, which is used by millions of people around the world. So it has been a kind of stable and an ongoing process. You're seeing primarily still being driven by foreign investors. International investors are the ones that are primarily kind of investing into Estonia, and kind of clearly the power law applies. So out of the $4 billion that has been running into Estonian ecosystem over the last 15 years, 90% has been coming from the external investors. And then the kind of the group of which are been getting those investments is relatively slim. So we're talking about 90% of the amount goes to top 10 companies. Out of that, half of that goes to top 1 company. So it's relatively skewed. So if Estonia wouldn't have the success stories that it had, probably there wouldn't be an ecosystem, or the ecosystem would be totally different that we're currently seeing. So I think that kind of the words that have been echoed around the world media that has been said by Sam Altman, that you don't necessarily need many people. Next unicorns will be driven by potentially one person is I think that they're right. Bangladeshi kind of clearly can raise like 170 million unicorns. You just need to have the appetite and then conviction and the vision to do so.
So it seems like you're saying that we need a spark where kind of it announces that Bangladesh is here. I think we haven't really gotten there. I think we have, say, Patao, but they haven't gotten an exit in real sense. But inshallah, if Chaldal gets an IPO very soon, then maybe that will be our first spot, maybe.
Sure. I think that truly that you can't be what you don't see. The humanity they're able to think one step ahead, maybe 2 steps ahead, but it's hard to think 100 steps ahead. And this kind of exponential mindset isn't something that humans are really strong at. And for that purpose, kind of success stories. Hopefully Chaldal will be the first success story that will be driving. It's kind of consumer, everybody can relate to. It's like easy to understand. And I do expect that to be a really strong kind of catalyst for the wider ecosystem.
So Stan, the early success of Skype has been monumental for Estonia's tech scene, as Rauno mentioned. So could you elaborate how success that catalyzed the creation of numerous other startups and kind of force a growth of the ecosystem in Estonia?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's helpful to lay out sort of the timeline of the last 30 years, how the ecosystem developed. So the IT businesses of Estonia in the 90s were mostly assembling hardware. Like you have a fresh economy, everybody's building companies, and government is setting up systems, and e-government is very strong, so everybody wants to have a computer, so people started assembling PCs. And like basically, that means that you import the components, you put them together, you sell them locally. Then that morphed gradually into selling software development. Like, okay, you have all the computers are there, and now you need software to run on them, and then you build banking systems and e-government systems and so forth. So the entire industry was dealing with that. There's one big problem with that, again, the small size of the country. Like if you're selling hours and you have 1 million people, then you will run out of hours to sell. So you can't indefinitely grow. And that led to the next generation, which was, and Skype was the first of the breakthrough of that, and there were a few other companies starting around the same time, where you don't sell the hours of software developers, but you build something valuable and ship that to the world. So again, like you take the man hours put in by 4 engineers and you send first 1 million copies, and a few years later, I was running product engineering at Skype, we were operating with 330 million monthly active users. So like you exactly the same code that maybe by that time 100 people had written, like goes to hundreds of millions of people and provides value. And having free calls around the world enables a lot of commerce and like all. So at peak, Skype had about 25% of all international calling minutes in the world, and most of them free. So we took like hundreds of billions out of the telecom industry and basically gave it to the users. And so that the economic impact can be massive. Now, once you have that story, what happened was that in 2005, when eBay acquired Skype for the first time, that was the first time it created three things, I would say. Anybody coming out of Skype, and one of my friends actually calls Skype the best business university Estonia has ever had. Everybody comes out with the experience how to build a global product. They either made some money or they know people who made a lot of money. And then you have this sort of business card with a logo or something that sort of you can open any door in the world and just walk into Silicon Valley offices of people, and you will get the meeting because like you're at Skype. And that created this interesting phenomena which I deeply believe is actually the pattern, and brings us back to Saldal as well, is once you have this first success, you will start creating waves of next companies in the ecosystem. So every company that was founded by a former employee of Skype had some money that came from the Skype founders, or like the Ambient Sound Investments was the first investment firm founded by the same group in Estonia. You have advisors, you hire our first employees with those experiences, and that gave us TransferWise. Now, the next wave is like people who work at TransferWise, they go out and they found the next company, and so that gave us, Veriff is a unicorn now, and Lightcode is a unicorn, like it will be a unicorn, hopefully soon. So Lightyear, sorry. And so there is this waves of companies, and the graph on a macro level, on economic level, is just absurd. So in the year 2006, where nobody really knew what the startup is, the total venture capital investment in Estonian startups was $6 million. In 2022, it was 1.3 billion a year. And so this 4 billion that Rauno mentioned, that's like a hockey stick, like this classic hockey stick that you've seen on the best companies in the world. We are having that on an ecosystem level. And only now, like there are 1,400 startups building in Estonia today, and only like last 5 years, I've gotten to a point where I occasionally meet founders that I don't know who they are. So like before it was very easy, like somebody at Skype was involved or somebody at TransferWise was involved and so forth. So now we've created this sort of new wave of young people who didn't, like maybe they were in kindergarten when Skype was happening, and now they are creating companies and building something new. So as actually the founding engineers, I think Jan and Ahti often joke that it's like one of the catalyzing effects is that if your classmates see that if this idiot built this company, why can't I? It's this sort of humility that you can create with this seeing that normal people, when they work hard, and have the ambition, and you give them the support by the ecosystem that they can actually build massive companies. And this is just to bring the story home. I think this is exactly like why Shaldal needs to succeed in a very visible, big way, so that the young kids coming out to school or learning coding or whatever they do right now, like they have a role model that, oh, I want to build Shaldal for that business. Like it's the language you want. Like.
You're exactly right. I mean, we didn't have role models, and now we do. And I think one of the very point that you made, like it has to have a full circle where the exit happens, and then the founders kind of go and then starts new off. And then, as you mentioned, the Skype was a university, and I think we haven't had that at that scale, but we have few. So, but it needs to happen at scale so that we see more transformation in the ecosystem. Yeah. Okay, Rauno, to you. So, in last 10 years in Bangladesh, startups received about $500 million, if I exclude the Bikash investments. So that was, and 90% of the investment came from international investors. So based on this data, the hard question is, are we on the right track? Is this something that is seen in other countries, like this minimum kind of investment in the early days? That's at about $50 million a year.
Yeah, I think that kind of looking at the region or looking Bangladesh as a standalone, then you have a kind of crazy healthy kind of population pyramid. Yeah, I think that kind of looking at the region or looking Bangladesh as a standalone, then you have a kind of crazy healthy kind of population pyramid, which you can't really say about US, you can't say about Europe, you can't say about kind of the developed nations. So that's like a really strong tailwind. If I'm looking around today here and kind of all the people that I met during my stay here, it's like the level of entrepreneurship is like remarkable. People thinking about solutions. Everybody is well spoken. English is a language that's been used. So looking at the amount of just sheer kind of talent that you have here, I don't really see the reason why it couldn't be different. I don't really kind of understand that on a wider scale. I think that sure, there needs to be kind of like kind of positive role models to kind of rely on, and also have a kind of higher grit and ambition about like breaking out of the molds. And like I was last week visiting India, and then there was this nice guy who was repairing shoes, and then just like started talking, and it turned out that this 2 square meter place was something that his great grandfather owned, and he repaired shoes. His father did the same thing. He was doing the same thing, and most likely he will son do the same thing. Totally fine, really respectable business, but most likely if the ambition for you and your kids is limited to that 2 square meter, it's like really hard to break out of the mold. I hope that like within this kind of audience here, the ambition is greater, and then kind of also willingness to support entrepreneurs thinking about similarly would be greater. So in essence, like there is a lot of capital in the world which still is looking for ways to deploy that, and hence I don't necessarily see reasons why it couldn't grow.
To you, I mean, the point that he made, how do we inject ambition? Because what we often see that we don't think big enough. So how do we do that at scale?
So there is probably 2 parts of that. One is the ambition, injecting the ambition culturally, and then there is the actual ecosystem supporting that to materialize. And on the first side, I think the big difference with Estonia and Bangladesh is that you can be very ambitious serving the Bangladeshi market. Like you can still build a product for 100 million people. And that's, in some ways, it's a luxury. Like you can do that, like that means that you know the culture, you know the language, you can support one currency and sort of a number of things that make life easier. The only thing I would warn about it is that it can also be a trap. There is something that we see in Europe, for example, is that when talking to a German entrepreneur or a French entrepreneur or a Polish entrepreneur, when their population is 40, 60, 80 million, they're building the first product for their own market, and then they forget about the rest. It's like then they end up building a software that is amazing, but it works in German only. or like American companies that build amazing software and hard code dollars. Like then, if you then realize 5 years later that you want to go international, then it is hard to sort of reprogram everything or rethink everything about like how your business works. And so it's this nice. I think the ambition. My advice there would be that build for the Bangladeshi market, but build from the ground up, assuming that you want to go to other markets as well, or like this sort of setup that should allow for that. And that in turn, I think, makes things more investable. So speaking in the sort of from an investor perspective, or like one way to think about the ecosystem development, one question to ask about when comparing startup ecosystems is like, how far do you have to travel for how much money? And when you have this first exit or first success and you have local angel investors, maybe you have somebody that you can go to and ask for a $5,000 check. And then you will develop the ecosystem a little bit more, and then you have a few angels where you can go and ask for a $100,000 check. And then you will develop the ecosystem more, and then you have seed funds that pop up, and then there is 3 or 4 funds where you can ask for you can get the $1 million seed round done in the country, and so forth and so forth. So Estonia has been through that path. Like the people coming out of Skype, they were writing $10,000, $20,000 tickets, but then you needed to raise $2 million, you probably had to travel to London. A few years ago, I think we were together in part of a investment in Estonia where it was a $20 million investment and all the emails were in Estonian. And I was like, okay, we've gotten to this point. But still, when Bolt, for example, needs to raise 200 million or 600 million of capital to expand around the world, they still need to travel to the US or talk to the biggest investors in the world. So the bar is always moving. And so I think as you develop the ecosystem, like if you have a super ambitious founder, they have the ambition to build something big, they can get the local 1 million round done locally and maybe a 5 million round locally. If they really want to go and build a product for all 180 million people in the country, then they would probably need tens and tens and tens of millions of just to invest into that growth. And that, I think, is the big challenge, and hopefully, like with the stock exchange and sort of getting more of the local capital comfortable.
And you mentioned 2 ingredients that are required for the transformation is ambition and global outlook. And I think in our conversation that kind of came out. So, and the outcome of that 2 ingredient is that they create a number of unicorns based out of Estonia. So how can Bangladesh produce these 2 essential ingredients to become a country that produce at least a unicorn at par with Asia?
Well, yeah, I think we've covered some parts of it already, the ambition bit we spoke about. But having a unicorn is a little bit of a dangerous metric as well. Because like the unicorns that were born, Europe has, I think, 80 or 100 unicorns, probably more than half of them were priced in 2021. And like if money is essentially free and interest rates are negative and capital is searching for things to back, and that sort of created this sort of bubble where you had more investments going into like the companies that were standing out, and there was like kind of self-reinforcing, and the peaks very quickly moved ahead. So I think the moment of truth of like unicorn building will come in the next few years, of like how many of those companies actually either go public or raise their next rounds at the higher valuations, and how many need to correct. So I think it's more interesting to look at maybe the metrics that relate to the composition of the economy. Like what's the share of tech exports or product companies' revenues of your GDP? What is the job creation in highly skilled tech jobs? What is the sort of the share? Like in case of Estonia, historically, like it was a timber producing industry, there was agricultural exports. Like before World War II, Estonia was exporting like butter and bacon to the UK, like that sort of stuff. And now this sort of 1,400 startups in the country are employing about 1.5, just the early stage startups are employing 1.5% of all the working population of the country and giving about 3% of the GDP. If you add more mature tech companies and telecoms and other sort of tech-related fields, it's 10% of the GDP. And now Estonian economy has been in recession for like 8 quarters. It's been sort of simmering and sort of falling. Last quarter it was 2%, so it's like contracting heavily in traditional industries. So like selling log houses to Norway is down. And the startups bucket still grew 18% last year. So you can see that how that sort of structurally takes over the economy and has a sort of an impact that is measurable in percentage points of GDP. And that's when I was mentioning that sort of MVP, like that's what I'm personally working on and what we created Plural for and have raised more capital to work through, is like how can we replicate that on a European level? Because in Europe it's super different. Like the startup numbers in the Southern Europe, in Greece, Italy, Spain are way lower than you would find in London or Berlin or Stockholm or Tallinn. And I think that's like Estonian model could be an inspiration for larger countries that, okay, if these guys could do it, it's kind of like the same as with startup inspiration. If these guys could do it with very little resources, then it is more about ideas and the will and the execution and all that. And then if you look at Estonia, you can build like a pretty simple list of things that we've done. It's like founding a company takes 12 minutes. Everything is digital. There is digital signature law from 2001. Like, I haven't signed anything on paper in Estonia for like 20 years. I haven't owned a printer for 20 years, literally. Then you have the tax system. Tax system doesn't, we don't pay taxes on profits that are not taken out of the company but reinvested. And if you think of profit taxes, then startups don't have profits in the first few years when they're still getting investments from the investors. So basically that removes any worry from the startup side. Like you just raise the money, build the business, pay people salaries, pay taxes on that, but any kind of taxation on the business becomes an issue when you start making profits. So it's delayed suitably for the startup industry. So startup visas, I can hire a person from Bangladesh on a Friday, they can start on Monday. So it was just something that the industry was telling the government that, hey guys, like we can build amazingly fast-growing companies, but like there is not enough talent in all these fields. And there are constraints that they said, okay, if you pay somebody, if they have a PhD in data science, or if they get 2 times more than the country's salary, like high talent immediately, you can have them move. So it's not about like one thing that you have to solve, but to create a healthy ecosystem. It is like ticking off of this list and then creating a very healthy dialogue with the government and the policymakers and the entrepreneurs who actually can feed back that this is working, this is not working, and the government can see if they can sort of remove more barriers from that growth.
Thank you so much. I love the answer. And Sami Bhai, I think we have to work on that unicorn definition and maybe define a new matrix for ourselves. Lovely answers. Thank you. We are in the last leg, so two more questions. So Ian, you mentioned that you went to India. So what aspect of the Indian tech ecosystem or startups culture caught you by surprise? And how do you think that insights could be beneficial for Bangladeshi ecosystem?
Culturally relatively similar, at least from the outside, leaving aside the religion part. I think that like the same comment that I mentioned previously about the kind of the just general macro tailwinds, as well as the kind of the level of entrepreneurship that I saw. There was somebody kind of providing me the fact that 83% of Indians are entrepreneurials by nature, which sounded crazy high, but then again, if I'm thinking about what type of national cuisines are you able to find as a restaurant in most of the countries in the world, then kind of Indian kind of comes to mind. Then that there might be something behind that. In terms of the tech ecosystem, kind of one thing that I think that it makes sense to kind of focus or drive towards to, and it's briefly or mostly also touching on what Sten mentioned, that not to be focused on or not to be closed on your own internal market. So I think that like India and to some degree kind of Bangladesh as well have been starting from this kind of being the call centers of the world, then trying to replicate technologies that have been working in the West, kind of Uber for India, kind of in terms of Ola or something like that. And I think that they are, and similar to Bangladesh, are on the verge of creating something for the world that would be coming out from Bangladesh, and something that would be relying on the strengths that you have. So whenever interacting with people in the States or in Europe, they're open, they're hospitable, but you still sense that there is some sort of kind of transaction behind that, what they're looking for. So the relationship is kind of transactional, whereas here I'm feeling that it's mostly, the hospitality is authentic. So kind of tying that together with the kind of, thanks. Tying that together with, so tying that together with being a kind of missionary, solving a problem that's kind of close to your heart, and the kind of authentic hospitality, I think that's providing a relatively good basis or fundament to build upon.
Yeah, I'm glad that you caught on, because when it comes to food, color, and noise, we just kind of rock on that. I'm sure you saw Dhaka traffic, but you know. All right, my last question to Stan. I mean, I have few, but I think I'm going to stick with this because a lot of founders kind of feel this pain. So startups based out of Bangladesh, they often struggle to get interest from international investors. And so I'm sure the same pain was felt by the founders in Estonia in the early days. So what strategies did you use to get the attention of international investors to get capital that we could actually replicate?
I think the easiest trick ever to get full and undivided attention by an investor is to build an amazing company. Like if you have a company that is growing at like 20% month on month, 100%, 500% year on year, like something that is extraordinary, then it all of a sudden starts to matter way less where you happen to be. And so if you look at the 10 Estonian unicorns, they've gone through the cycle where it was like Skype was legally headquartered in Luxembourg and had offices in Tallinn and Stockholm and then London. And the founding group was 6 people from 4 different nationalities. Like it was very sort of ambiguous where it was from. But when it broke through, everybody wanted to have a piece of that. Bolt, which is now 3,000 people, has tens of millions of customers around the world. And when Bolt was raising their first round, they had absolutely no traction. Like they had, I said no to Bolt several times when the company was worth $1 million. And I invested in Bolt at $1 billion because then it was cheap. so it was like an extreme case of like the founder was 18, selling, trying to install his software on the taxi drivers' phones and sort of hustling as crazy and could not raise money for anything. And when he sort of managed to get through and basically raising from local people who knew nothing about tech but wanted to back him as a person. And then by the time his numbers started growing like crazy and he was growing faster, he was basically growing as fast as Uber but at way lower cost, way more efficiently. And that caught the eye of international investors. So he had like big funds from the US and China flying in and trying to sort of invest in his money. And when before that, like Skype was legally headquartered somewhere else, TransferWise moved or put their legal entity into London. And there were like companies that did these things mostly to accommodate investors, to make it easier and clearer to understand that you have a holding company in some other country and then you sort of have development in Estonia and so forth. So Bolt was the first one who said, nope, we're Estonian. Like if you want to invest, you invest in the Estonian entity. And because their numbers were so great, like nobody argued anymore. And now that has created the precedent that for any next founder to say to an American investor that, yep, you're going to invest in the Estonian entity, we're not going to create the Delaware one. Like there is now precedence and power and lawyers who have done that before. Like all these things now exist. So again, like it's going from one example and then generalizing that into a standard of how the ecosystem thinks and operates. Yeah, that would be my...
and big hands to Sten.